Keldrak Sarnath sighed as the shuttle made its way down to the planet. His mentor, Varshak Dalnar, had always criticized his confidence, calling it arrogance. But even the old man couldn't deny Keldrak's skill. In sending him out to fight martial artists from different species, Varshak had probably hoped Keldrak would meet his match. Keldrak chuckled to himself as he remembered how he had won every single fight so far. This one would be no different. It had only been a few months since these humans had been discovered, and while their first contact had shown them to be capable warriors, there was a big difference between firing guns from the safety of a cockpit and fighting someone with your bare hands. No doubt this Sebastian Moreau would lose, just like all the others. The shuttle landed, and Keldrak grabbed his bags in one hand, the claws at the tips of his fingers scraping against the reinforced material. As he stepped onto the spaceport's landing pad, he flexed his long, whip-like tail absently, the motion more instinctual than intentional. His crimson-hued scales caught the light, faint streaks of black tracing jagged lines across his limbs. His brow shifted, making the ridges near his horns shift slightly as he scanned his surroundings, the sharp angles of his face forming into a smirk. He had to keep himself from bursting out laughing. These humans, while they stood nearly as tall as him, lacked the dense musculature he had come to expect from worthy opponents. Their jaws were smooth, their teeth barely noticeable. If one of these creatures struck him, would he even feel it? Was this even going to be worth his time? When he finally arrived at his destination and walked in, his fears were alleviated only slightly. None of these humans would stand a chance, of course, but these ones at least looked like they might survive a hit or two. "I'm here for Sebastian Moreau," Keldrak announced loudly, his patience already worn thin. The humans simply gave him strange looks. After a few moments, another human walked into the room. "I'm guessing you're Keldrak," the man said before continuing. "Sebastian is getting ready for the fight. Come, I'll take you to a locker room so you can do the same." Keldrak was led through a couple of doors to a locker room where he was left to prepare. He felt eager to get started already, hoping it would at least last long enough to make the long journey worth it. Keldrak had fought martial artists from almost every single state within the Interstellar Assembly. He had faced one of the insectoid Zyrixians in the Lyrissic Union and broken its crystalline exoskeleton. He had torn open the carapace of an Erythian in the Etherian Covenant. He had fought a Kaelur in the Sylpharian Nexus and left it broken on the arena floor. He had nearly shattered the crystalline body of an Orith in the Sharthanic Dominion. Virmali, Thrinthia, Ixari, Forina, none of them had been able to challenge him. The humans would be no different. When he finished getting ready, he walked out of the locker room and was led down a hallway to a larger room. The space was filled with exercise equipment, much of it in use. Keldrak smiled. At least there would be an audience. Humiliating his opponent was always fun. In the middle of the room stood an octagonal cage, a single human inside. Probably his opponent. He wore simple shorts and gloves, leaving most of his body exposed. It was true. These humans truly had nothing when it came to natural armor, Keldrak thought to himself, almost respecting the fact that they didn't try to compensate for it with protective gear. Almost, Keldrak stepped into the cage with Sebastian, and the door was closed behind him. Outside the cage, the human that had led him here spoke up. "Sebastian, meet Keldrak. Keldrak, this is Sebastian. This match will go until submission or knockout. Any questions?" "Nope," Sebastian responded calmly. Keldrak chuckled softly. "Let's start this already. I'm sick of waiting." A bell rang. The fight had begun. Keldrak lunged forward, striking fast and hard. Sebastian blocked the hit but staggered back. Keldrak smirked at the display. Pathetic. He would push this fragile thing against the wall and end it quickly. Just a quick reminder before we get started, only 4% of my viewers have subscribed to the channel so far. If you enjoy the content, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. Thank you so much. Now continue amazing story. Keldrak advanced as he struck again and again. But Sebastian didn't block. He simply dodged, leaning, shifting, slipping just out of reach every time. Keldrak narrowed his eyes. This human was fast, but speed meant nothing when the opponent finally made a mistake. Keldrak swung again, predicting the dodge, and followed up instantly, his other hand ready to land the real blow. Sebastian had dogged right into it. He wouldn't escape this one. Except he did. Sebastian ducked under the punch. Before Keldrak could react, a brutal uppercut slammed into his jaw. He staggered back, momentarily stunned. He recovered quickly, but Sebastian was already pressing the advantage. He had to regain the advantage. Keldrak snarled and lashed out with a clawed strike, aiming to tear flesh. It was too fast to dodge. Sebastian would have to block, and when he did, his claws would dig into the flesh and the fight would be over. But Sebastian didn't block. Instead, he stepped forward into Keldrak's guard and grabbed his wrist. Before Keldrak could react, Sebastian twisted, placing his back against the Drathak's chest. A sudden pull, a shift of weight, and Keldrak was airborne. He hit the ground hard, the impact rattling his bones. Sebastian immediately locked in an armbar, and pain flared through Keldrak's limb. No, Keldrak roared, rage burning through him. How dare this soft-skinned creature trap him like this? He struggled, but Sebastian's grip was unyielding as the pain grew worse. If this continued, his arm would break. No, he wouldn't allow it. Summoning all his strength, Keldrak surged upward, lifting Sebastian off the ground. With a furious snarl, he slammed the human into the wall of the cage. Sebastian's grip loosened, just for a moment, but that was all Keldrak needed. He threw his opponent off, breathing heavily, fury burning in his crimson eyes. Sebastian rolled to his feet, grinning. That smile only stoked Keldrak's anger even further. He charged, attacking relentlessly, forcing Sebastian on the defensive. Keldrak saw his opening. Sebastian ducked an attack, and Keldrak leaned back, avoiding the inevitable counterstrike. Sebastian was left open, and so he struck. Keldrak smiled. His timing had been impeccable. His form was perfect. Sebastian would have no time to dodge or duck this one, and he was too strong for this weakling to block this attack. But he missed. Sebastian deflected the strike, grabbing Keldrak's wrist and yanking hard. The sudden pull forced Keldrak to stumble forward, right into a punch that smashed into his face. His vision flickered, but before he could recover, Sebastian yanked his arm again, forcing him into another staggering step, this time straight into a brutal elbow to the face. Keldrak reeled backward, dazed, his footing unstable. Sebastian finally let go, and the momentum carried Keldrak further back, slamming him against the cage wall. Out of sheer desperation, Keldrak swung wildly, claws slicing through the air. But Sebastian simply weaved to the side, avoiding the attack with ease, and then he struck. Blow after blow crashed into Keldrak. Punches, elbows, unrelenting, merciless. Each strike hammered his body, his vision blurring, his strength failing. He could feel consciousness slipping away. And then the barrage stopped. Keldrak barely managed to look up, dazed, breath ragged. Through his blurred vision, he could barely make out a fist headed directly for his face. Keldrak's eyes went wide as for the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt fear. Keldrak woke up to a familiar face. His mentor, Varshak Dal-Nar. "I should have guessed that you had. Plan this, old man." Keldrak grunted in pain as he slowly sat up. Varshak shook his head. "I didn't plan anything. When the humans were first discovered, I managed to get a look at some of their martial arts through a friend of my brother's. So, when you sent me a message saying your next opponent was going to be a human, I didn't need to prepare anything. I already knew you would lose." Keldrak frowned. "Well, congratulations, old man. But if you think this will teach me humility," he said mockingly, "you're out of luck." Varshak chuckled. "If getting your ass kicked would have curbed your arrogance, Keldrak, I could have easily taken care of that myself. No, for that, you needed to see something like that." Keldrak turned to look in the direction his mentor had indicated. He saw Sebastian standing in the ring with someone that even he would hesitate to challenge. They were fighting, and they were laughing. People like you and I, Keldrak, we fight to further ourselves along the path of mastery that we have chosen. But humans, sure, mastery is a factor, but more importantly, they enjoy it. Keldrak watched as Sebastian used his superior speed and maneuverability to evade his opponent's strikes, occasionally exploiting opportunities, but never overcommitting to any attack, just like what had been done to him. They will go through the pains and injuries of training and exercise simply because it's fun. Sebastian's opponent staggered backwards from one of the strikes and swung to retaliate. Sebastian smoothly ducked under the attack and maneuvered himself behind his opponent, jumping off the wall of the cage and punching him in the face. The man went down and soon began to laugh as Sebastian helped him up. Keldrak's eyes went wide with realization. During their fights, Sebastian had been holding back. Enjoy more interesting story. It had only been a month since Elliot was last here. He had intended to stay on Earth for longer, recover, process, maybe even take a break. But when you're the one who made first contact with intelligent alien life, you don't exactly get much time to yourself. Even if he had, he would have found himself returning sooner rather than later. He missed them. The research station looked different. The station had received a surge of funding with everything that happened, and it was clear that the influx of resources was being put to good use. As soon as the station AI approved his docking request, Elliot carefully maneuvered his ship onto the largest landing pad available. A gentle thud. The engines powered down, leaving behind an almost eerie silence. He took a deep breath, then disembarked. The air outside the ship was crisp, tinged with the sterile scent of metal and recycled oxygen. Elliot barely had time to take in his surroundings before a familiar, imposing figure approached. Trevok Dalnar. The Drathek stood with his usual grounded presence, arms crossed over his chest, his dark plated scales reflecting the station's artificial lighting and faint bronze undertones. His glowing metallic eyes studied Elliot for a moment before he gave a slow, approving nod. "Elliot," Trevok rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "Didn't expect you back so soon?" Elliot grinned. "Yeah, well, Earth's a little too normal for me these days." Trevok let out a quiet, rumbling chuckle. He then gestured toward the inner halls of the station. "Come, you'll want to see this." As they walked, Trevok explained the reason for his haste. The increased funding hadn't just improved the station, it had accelerated their research. The gravitational anomaly that had first drawn their attention, they had finally managed to identify the source. A strange object had been discovered in the asteroid belt, and they had retrieved it. "We just brought it in," Trevok said. "Hasara and Kralvek are already examining it." Elliot couldn't help but laugh. "First time I got here just before. A pirate attack? And now just after you guys recovered some kind of anomaly? I've got some impeccable timing." The doors to the central research chamber slid open with a quiet hiss. The room was dim, the primary source of light emanating from a strange object at its center, where a containment field had been erected around it. Kralvek stood nearby, his golden eyes gleaming as he observed Hasara, who was inspecting the object with intense focus. Elliot barely had time to take in the scene before a sharp sound broke the air. A datapad clattering to the ground. His gaze snapped to Hasara. She was standing unnaturally still, her feathered frame frozen in place. Her luminous eyes were locked onto the object, unblinking, unseeing. Her wings, which usually twitched with emotion, hung limply at her sides. Something was wrong. Elliot took a step forward, but the station AI's voice crackled over the comms. "Warning, unknown object is exhibiting a psychological effect on Hasara Quarrel. Recommend maintaining distance to prevent further exposure." Kralvek tensed. "Can we shut it down?" "Insufficient data. Proximity may increase risk of additional exposure," Trevok cursed under his breath. "Damn thing's already got her." Elliot looked at Hasara again. She wasn't moving. Was she even breathing? Seconds passed, stretching unbearably. Elliot made his choice. Screw this. He ignored the AIs, warning, and strode forward. "Elliot, wait!" Kralvek's voice cut off as the world vanished. Elliot looked around, but saw nothing in any direction, stood upon a floor that similarly wasn't there. The air was thick, pressing in on him like the depths of an ocean, yet weightless, as if he were standing in a vacuum. He lifted a hand, only to realize he couldn't feel his own movement, couldn't sense the strain of his muscles. It was as though his body existed out of obligation, a suggestion rather than a certainty. Then came the voices. Soft at first, an indistinct murmur just at the edge of his hearing, but then one rose above the others. Clear, familiar, his own Elliot. Turned and saw himself. Not a reflection, not a projection, but another version of him, standing there, talking to someone, a stranger. Yet even as Elliot thought the word, the certainty of it collapsed. This was no stranger. Memories surged into his mind, a friendship spanning years, laughter, late nights, whispered conversations about hopes and fears. The feeling of a bond so deep it had shaped him, defined him. Except, this wasn't real. The moment Elliot understood, the grief hit. The memories stayed, vivid and whole, but without truth, without reality. They were lost to him all the same. More visions surfaced, a woman smiling at him, a warmth in her eyes that made his chest tighten. Someone he had loved. A child reaching for his hand. His child, though he had never been a father. A life lived in another world, on another path, as real as the air he breathed. And then, as quickly as they came, they changed. The woman's face shifted into another, a different love, a different life. The child was gone, similarly replaced, by a different life, then another, and another. Elliot tried to hold on, but the harder he clung, the more they slipped away. The faces, the voices, the lives, so many could have been so real they pressed against his mind like memories he had, simply forgotten until now. A childhood friend he never met, a love that never bloomed, a teacher who never guided him. They were real in every way that mattered. They should have been real. He refused to let them go. But what did that mean? If he clutched at one, he lost. Another. If he turned toward a life with one person, he turned away from countless others. He couldn't pull them all together, couldn't keep them. The moment he chose, he destroyed all the rest. His gut twisted. There had to be a way. If he just held still, if he waited, if he refused to decide, then maybe he wouldn't have to let anything go. But no, that wasn't right, was it? Because standing still was a decision, and right now, the decision he was making was to be lost. The realization stabbed through him like ice. If he refused to choose, he would simply be trapped, paralyzed, dragged in 1,000 directions by lives he would never live, people he would never meet, until there was nothing left of him. At all. He wanted to keep everything. But in trying to keep everything, he would have nothing. The air felt lighter. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The memories remained, but the weight of them eased. He didn't need to erase them. He didn't need to reject them. They were real, not in the way that meant they had happened, but in the way that meant they could have. But it did not mean they were his. Elliot opened his eyes. Hesera sat curled up on the ground before him, her wings wrapped tightly around herself, the feathered edges trembling. She was surrounded by visions of her own. They flickered and shifted, countless lives unfolding and vanishing in the space of moments. Faces of strangers turned familiar, then faded into nothing. Conversations began, but never finished. Hands reached out, but never touched. Elliot watched as she seemed to exist at the center of infinite possibilities, each one stretching toward her and then slipping away before it could become real. He stepped forward. The ground, or whatever it was, did not resist him. If anything, it felt easier now, as though he had passed through the worst of it. Hesera had not. He moved carefully, making sure his footsteps were audible. She did not react, even as he knelt beside her, even as he sat. The only sign she gave that she knew he was there was a flicker in her breathing. Hesera. His voice was quiet, but steady. Her wings pulled in tighter. You're not real. The words were so small, so certain. Elliot reached out, resting a hand lightly against the sleek feathers along her wing. She flinched. He didn't pull away. Slowly, cautiously, she turned her head to look at him. I am, he said simply. Her pupils were wide, her breathing uneven. He watched as realization struggled to break through whatever she was seeing, whatever weight was pressing in on her. She shifted her wings slightly away from his touch, but the tension in her posture eased, just a little. Elliot didn't push. He let the moment sit. Finally, Hesera exhaled. How did you get through it? Her voice was hoarse, like she had been trying to talk over a storm for hours. He glanced at the shifting visions still flickering around them, at the countless paths leading toward and away from her. I chose, Hesera swallowed. Her wings shuddered. I can't. Elliot tilted his head, watching her carefully. Why not? Because any choice I make... She hesitated, her claws pressing lightly against her own wings. Any choice means cutting something off. Someone off. Her voice dropped lower, rough with something raw. If I turn left instead of right, I might never meet someone I could have known. If I take one path, I leave 1,000 others behind. Even being here, talking to you, I might be missing someone I was meant to meet. If I do anything, I erase something, someone. Elliot let the words settle. He had felt the weight of it himself. The way this strange place pressed infinite lives against his mind made them feel as though they were his to lose. He had clawed his way through that suffocating need to hold on to everything. But for Hisara, it was something deeper. "This isn't just this place, is it?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, a short, jerky motion. "It's my people. It's—" Her wings tightened, her throat working around words that didn't want to come out. "Relationships mean everything to us. Every connection, every bond, it's—" She gestured vaguely, as if trying to grab hold of something intangible. "We value them more than anything. And She exhaled sharply. "I kill them. Every second, every breath I take. They die before they even begin, because I make choices." Her voice cracked. "Because I exist." Elliot let Hesera's words settle, watching the way she curled in on herself, the way her wings trembled under the weight of something too vast to hold. The shifting visions flickered in her eyes, lives unlived, bonds unformed, paths she believed she had already lost. He exhaled softly. "Hisara," he said, his voice careful, steady. "If you don't choose anything, if you stay here, frozen, none of these relationships will ever happen." She flinched, her grip tightening on herself, claws curling slightly against her wings. "I know it feels like making a choice kills everything else," Elliot continued gently, "but refusing to choose doesn't save them. It just guarantees that none of them will ever be real." Hisara shook her head, her breath quickening. That's not how it works." Her voice was fragile, desperate. "If I wait, if I don't act, then maybe something will happen that lets me keep more of them. If I move too soon, I could be throwing away the best possible path." Elliot frowned. "How long would you wait?" Hisara faltered. "A minute? An hour?" His voice stayed soft, but his words pressed forward. "A lifetime? How long until— You're sure? How long until you know you won't lose something precious?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Elliot's expression softened again. "And what about everything you've already chosen? Every path you've already walked? Are those worthless just because they meant letting go of other possibilities?" Hisara's breath hitched. He met her gaze. "Have you ever made a choice that brought you happiness?" She swallowed hard. Her claws twitched slightly against the curve of her wings. Slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. "Then wasn't it worth making?" She turned her face away, wings shifting as she pondered Elliot's question. For a long moment, there was silence between them. The visions around her flickered, uncertain, as if waiting for her to decide whether to hold on or let go. Finally, she whispered, "Then what should I do?" Elliot tilted his head. Her hands tightened. How do I choose? What if I pick the wrong thing? What if I make the wrong decision and ruin everything?" Her voice cracked. "What if I lose something that I was meant to have?" Elliot exhaled. "There is no right choice," he said, "and there is no wrong one either." Hisara's eyes widened slightly as she looked up at him, searching his face. Elliot glanced at the shifting memories around them. "Look at all of this," he said quietly. "Look at how many different lives you could have lived, how many people you could have known." His voice wasn't mournful nor regretful. It was full of something else, something closer to wonder. Hisara's wings twitched. "And I will never know them," she murmured. Elliot tilted his head. "Maybe not," he admitted, "but you do get to choose who you will know. You get to choose who you let into your life, who you hold on to, who you cherish." He gestured to the swirling visions. "The beauty of this isn't in what's lost. It's in knowing just how much is possible. Just how much has been possible. This whole time." Hisara's breath caught. "You could have lived any of these lives," Elliot continued, "but you didn't, and you never had to, because the life you did live, the choices you did make, they were real, and they brought real people into your life, real relationships, real joy." He met her gaze again. "And you still have choices ahead of you." Elliot smiled warmly. She swallowed, her eyes flickering between the faces she had never met and the memories she had truly lived. Elliot let a small breath of laughter escape him. "It's kind of incredible, isn't it?" he said. To have so much freedom, to have so many paths you could have taken, to know that even now, you still get to choose. Hisara's wings, once tightly curled around her, loosened further. You don't have to stay here, Elliot told her gently. You don't have to be afraid of choosing. He pushed himself to his feet, then turned and held out his hand. For now, he said, why not choose to stand? Hisara stared at his outstretched hand, the weight of endless possibilities still pressing against her. The visions flickered around her, still tempting, still whispering. Just for an instant, her gaze caught on one of the shifting visions. Elliot stood beside her, his presence familiar yet different. Closer in a way she hadn't even thought to imagine. Yet another bond that hadn't gotten the chance to flourish. Yet, slowly, she unfolded her wings as she looked up at Elliot. Her hand trembled as she reached for his. Clawed fingers brushed against his palm, hesitant, uncertain. Then, with a deep breath, she took it. He helped her up as the void around them faded away, and the station reasserted itself in an instant. Kralvek's voice continued as though nothing had happened. Don't go near that thing. You have no idea what it's doing to her? Amazing another story. Nolran sighed as he reread his mission briefing, hoping he had either misread it or that by some miracle it had changed. He had not misread anything, and nothing had changed. He was to head out into the woods, link up with 2 members of the Terran Federal Military, and lead them to a hill with a clear view of a Korath synapse point. From there, the humans would eliminate the relay drone to cut the local drones off from the hive mind in preparation for a counteroffensive. He put the datapad down and continued preparing his gear. The task ahead seemed almost impossible. Not only did he need to evade countless Korath patrols, but he also had to help the humans do the same. None of them had experience navigating this terrain. Moreover, the humid atmosphere of the planet significantly reduced the effective range of laser weapons, so Nolran had no idea how they intended to take down a relay drone from such a long distance. With so many obstacles in their path, he couldn't help but feel like this was a suicide mission. But it was his mission, and he had a duty to carry it out, even if he wasn't happy about it. His personal feelings would have to be set aside. This was about the bigger picture. He checked his gear one last time before heading out, marking the rendezvous point on the display in his helmet. Nolran departed the base, passing through the outer gates where patrols maintained their watch. As he stepped into the wilderness beyond, the structured hum of the base faded, replaced by the quiet rustle of the forest. He moved carefully into the dense undergrowth, his stealth suit helping him meld almost seamlessly with his surroundings. About halfway to the rendezvous point, Nolran spotted a Korath patrol advancing through the dense foliage. Even the most basic Korath drones were formidable, and a single misstep could spell disaster. If even one drone detected him, the relay drone would be alerted in moments, and the central hive mind would follow. He dropped low, blending into the natural cover of the forest. His muscles tensed as the patrol passed mere meters from his position. He waited, breath held, until the last drone moved out of sight. Only then did he exhale slowly, resuming his advance with heightened caution. The forest seemed to shift around him, the wind stirring the trees and bushes in an almost rhythmic motion. Nolran ignored the deceptive tranquility. Every step carried the weight of potential danger, but his training and instincts guided him steadily forward. As he neared the rendezvous point, he froze. Another Korath patrol was heading directly for it. Instinctively, he concealed himself again, scanning the area and weighing his options. With the humans seemingly delayed and the patrol too close to risk diverting it, waiting was his only viable choice. What caught his attention, however, was a pair of strange markers on his helmet display. 2 patches of underbrush around the rendezvous were highlighted as friendly. It didn't make sense, but there was no time to dwell on it. He waited for what felt like an eternity as the patrol passed by, the Korath almost stepping directly on top of the supposedly friendly underbrush. When their presence faded, Nolran rose and slowly approached the rendezvous point. To his surprise, as he stepped into the area, the underbrush shifted and stood up, revealing 2 camouflaged figures who had now risen into a crouched stance. One made a hand signal to the other, who quietly moved in the direction of the Korath patrol. The first figure approached Nolran, and his helmet display updated the marker to identify the figure as Sergeant Evan Hawk Daniels. Even crouched, the human was nearly invisible against the surrounding environment. His entire form melded into the foliage around him. The fabric of the suit was a patchwork of cool blues and purples, designed to mimic the surrounding plants and shadows. Thin, flexible branches and leaves were woven into the fabric, swaying lightly with the breeze, making the figure appear as nothing more than a natural part of the forest. Nolran noticed the faintest shift in texture where the suit had been meticulously crafted to imitate not only the plant life, but also the uneven, damp surface of the forest floor. The suit seemed to make its wearer one with the planet itself. Nolran barely even noticed it when the other figure, Corporal Isabel Lizzie, Rojas, returned. "They're gone," she said quietly. "That was a close one." Daniels nodded before looking at Nolran. "I'm guessing you're our tour guide?" he asked in a hushed tone. "That's right, Kalar Nolran Vythar." Nolran shook his head, lightly, dismissing his shock at what he had seen and focusing on the situation at hand. "Our destination is quite some distance from here. Assuming we don't run into too many patrols, we should get there in about 4 or 5 of your hours. So, if you two are ready, we should get moving sooner rather than later." Daniels glanced towards Rojas before nodding. "Let's get going then." The dense undergrowth made quiet movement difficult, but it also provided excellent cover. Nolran led the way, moving with practiced caution, his keen senses alert to any change in the environment. Behind him, the humans moved carefully, their ghillie suits blending so seamlessly with the environment that Nolran sometimes had to double-check they were still following him. Nolran noticed a soft crunch, a short distance ahead of them, and he signaled for the group to stop as he dropped low. Instinctively, Daniels and Rojas mirrored his movement, their forms blending perfectly into the foliage. Nolran pressed himself flat against the ground, his senses straining to catch any sign of what had caused the sound. Faint rustling reached his senses, leaves shifting unnaturally, stems bending as something moved somewhat carelessly through the forest. Quorath. He motioned silently to the humans to hold position, his focus narrowing to the approaching threat. Moments later, 2 Quorath patrol members emerged between the towering trunks ahead. Their segmented, glistening bodies moved smoothly, their narrow heads sweeping from side to side in a perfect rhythm. Their limbs were sharp and insectile, designed for both combat and utility, and their muted colors blended almost as well with the forest as Nolran himself. The patrol advanced with a deliberate, eerie patience, their bodies making faint scraping noises as they pushed through the dense undergrowth. One paused, tilting its head slightly as if listening, and for a moment, Nolran thought it might have noticed something. He forced himself to remain perfectly still, every motionless fiber of his being blending with the terrain. The Quorath resumed its march, and the patrol moved closer. Their legs brushed through the ferns and vines. They got so close, Nolran could see minute details in their chitinous armor. One of the patrol members briefly stopped again, its head turned in the direction of Daniels and Rojas. The humans remained, unnervingly silent, as though they had vanished entirely into the foliage. The patrol lingered for another breathless moment before continuing its methodical sweep of the area. As the patrol slowly moved away from them, eventually the sounds of their movement began to fade. Nolran risked a glance at the others, confirming. They were still in position. He waited until the faint rustling disappeared entirely before signaling for the group to move again. No words were spoken as they resumed their trek, the forest closing in around them once more. As they continued their journey, patrols slowly became bigger and more frequent the closer they got to the synapse point. Each encounter forced them to slow down further, sometimes remaining in place for agonizing stretches of time as groups of Quorath passed nearby. Nolran felt the weight of tension in every step, the stakes rising with each passing moment. Eventually, they reached the hill. While it offered a clear line of sight on the synapse point, the foliage wasn't nearly as dense here. Walking straight up would expose them. Nolran crouched low, scanning the terrain as he pondered how to get the humans up the hill unseen. A light tap on his back startled him, and he turned to see Daniels. "Now it's our turn to do our job, I guess," Daniels whispered. He signaled to Rojas before they both quietly dropped prone. Without a word, the two began slowly crawling up the hill. Nolran watched them for a moment, barely able to track their progress with how slowly and carefully they moved. Their camouflage made them nearly invisible against the uneven ground and scattered vegetation. After a few minutes of observation, Nolran decided to follow their lead. He dropped prone, moving cautiously, but the humans had already disappeared into the terrain ahead of him. It seemed to take another hour before he finally caught up to them. Daniels and Rojas were lying still in a concealed position near the hill's crest, the synapse point visible in the distance. "Nice of you to join us," Rojas whispered with a faint smirk. Nolrin didn't reply, instead watching as Daniels silently began to set up his weapon. Daniels moved with deliberate precision, every motion controlled to avoid unnecessary noise or movement. He extended the rifle's bipod, positioning it firmly but gently on a flat patch of earth. The sniper rifle itself was a sleek, matte black weapon with modular components and a barrel nearly as long as Nolrin's arm. Daniels adjusted the scope, making minuscule turns to the dials while glancing briefly through the lens. His body remained completely still except for his hands, which worked with the methodical expertise of someone who had done this countless times before. Beside him, Rojas was scanning the synapse point through her binoculars, her voice barely audible as she relayed information to Daniels. "Target identified. Synapse relay drone, elevation approximately -15 degrees relative to our position. Distance, 2,755 meters." She paused, taking another moment to observe. Wind speed steady at 8 kilometers per hour, slight crosswind from left to right. Daniels gave a slight nod, making minute adjustments to the rifle's position and angle. Rojas continued gathering details, adjusting her own equipment to monitor environmental factors. "Several minor obstructions. Visibility is limited, but we have a direct line to the target," she finished. Nolrin's eyes flicked to Daniel's rifle, then back to the synapse point. As he watched the humans prepare, a thought struck him. It had been gnawing at him since the mission began. The impossible distance, the humid atmosphere that warped energy-based weapons. But now, seeing the humans' ballistic rifle and their methodical setup, it clicked into place. Of course, the projectile didn't rely on light or energy to reach its target. It would cut through the air, unaffected by the distortions that plagued his people's weaponry in this environment. For the first time, the shot seemed feasible. Still daunting, yes, but not as absurdly out of reach as he had initially feared. The humans had come prepared for the conditions, and their expertise now felt like the critical piece of the puzzle. Nolrin quietly grabbed his own optics and looked at the base of Synapse Point, where the Synapse relay drone sat beneath a series of high, arching structures, metallic but organic in design, like skeletal ribs growing from the earth to protect it. The relay drone itself was stationed on the ground, nestled between layers of dense foliage and heavy protective barriers made of thick, reinforced material. The drone's dark, iridescent exoskeleton shimmered faintly in the dim light, and its numerous antennae flickered with a quiet, almost imperceptible hum, relaying commands to the surrounding Quorith drones. Unlike other drones that could be protected behind thick, chitinous plates, the relay drone needed an open connection with the rest of the hive, but this exposure was highly controlled. It was placed at the center of a large, fortified area, surrounded by heavily armed Quorith drones and several smaller, camouflaged guard posts. The area was heavily monitored, both by drones and automated sentries, keeping the relay drone as safe as possible without obstructing its connection to the hive mind. The positioning was deliberate. The drone needed access to the full spectrum of the Quorith hive's communications network, but it also needed protection from potential attack. The result was a carefully balanced vulnerability, a vulnerability they were now in a position to exploit. Daniels took one last look through the scope, making sure everything was in place. His breathing slowed as he made the final adjustments, his movements so smooth they were nearly imperceptible. Rojas glanced at him once more. "Fire when ready." "Steady," Daniels muttered to himself, his voice barely a whisper as he lined up the crosshairs on the dark, distant silhouette of the relay drone, its antennae twitching in the low light. His finger hovered just above the trigger. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. Nolrin couldn't help but watch as Daniel's body tensed, then relaxed, his finger gently pulling back. The silence was shattered with the sudden crack of the rifle's report. Daniels had made his adjustments, correcting for the wind, the bullet drop over the 2,755-meter distance, and so much more. Every single factor had been accounted for. The rifle's scope had been carefully set to compensate for the trajectory shift, with Daniels factoring in the exact distance and elevation needed to keep the round true. The bullet struck the relay, drone right in its unarmored head. The round tore through the fragile shell, blowing out the back and painting the ground beneath with a gruesome spray of neurons, fluid, and dark green ichor. The relay drone immediately went limp, crumpling to the ground. The effect on the Korath drones was immediate. Their synchronized movements faltered, their connection to the hive mind severed. Precision gave way to chaos as a wave of confusion rippled through their ranks. Drones that had been deadly moments before now staggered, some freezing in place, others continuing their last received instructions with mechanical repetition. A few wandered aimlessly, bumping into trees or circling in confusion. Disconnected from the hive's constant directives, they were disorganized and vulnerable. No longer the formidable, unified threat they had been. Nulren observed the disarray with grim satisfaction. If their intel was correct, the loss of this relay drone had severed the hive mind's control over this entire front, leaving the central command nodes exposed. The hive mind would respond, of course. Other relay drones would soon relay new orders to cover the gap, but those drones would be stretched thin. Until a new relay drone could be grown and deployed, the Korath's positions on this planet were significantly weakened. Nice shot, Hawk, Rojas chuckled quietly, her voice tense despite the victory. She had risen into a crouched stance, scanning the area around them for any movement, automatic rifle at the ready. Thanks, Lizzie, Daniels responded, quickly disassembling his rifle and slinging the case over his shoulder. Everyone ready? To go? The initial shock caused by the loss of the relay drone wouldn't last forever. The drones would continue their aimless actions, so things were bound to get chaotic. They quickly made their way back into the denser parts of the forest and began the long journey to their extraction point. The trek back was tense, the urgency hanging in the air like a cloud. Nulren led the way, navigating the terrain with silent precision. Behind him, Daniels and Rojas moved in perfect coordination, their steps measured to avoid any unnecessary noise. It wasn't long before they encountered their first patrol. A small group of Korath drones stumbled into view. They moved sluggishly, their once coordinated patterns completely broken. Some were still carrying out old orders, while others wandered aimlessly. The stark contrast between their previous efficiency and their current disarray was almost unsettling. Nulren motioned for the others to halt, dropping low into the underbrush. His heart raced, but his body remained still, every sense heightened as he observed the drones. They were no longer a cohesive force. Without the hive mind, they were fragmented, but this made them unpredictable. Rojas crouched beside him, her rifle at the ready. Daniels had already positioned himself as well, automatic rifle aimed at one of the drones. Easy targets, Rojas murmured, her voice barely audible. Nulren raised a hand, signaling for them to hold. It was safer to let them pass. This group was too big to take out before they could fire back. A few seconds later, the patrol wandered off. Nulren exhaled silently, giving the signal to continue. Let's go. They moved on, keeping low and silent. Their pace quickened as they navigated the dense foliage. Another patrol appeared shortly after, this one smaller, only 2 drones. These drones were slightly more alert, but still lacked coordination. They wandered in the opposite direction, oblivious to the team's presence. This one's on us, Daniels whispered, glancing at Rojas, who subtly nodded back at him. He raised his rifle, lined up the shot, and fired. The first drone crumpled, its head snapping back from the precise impact. The second drone paused, momentarily confused, but before it could react, Rojas silenced it with a short burst. The already suppressed sounds of the automatic rifles quickly faded into nothingness as they were absorbed by the dense foliage. Clear, Rojas muttered. The team continued, slowly picking up the pace. They encountered more scattered patrols along the way. Some they evaded, waiting silently as the confused drones passed by. Others they eliminated quickly and efficiently when evasion wasn't an option. Nulren's mind remained focused as their distance from the extraction point gradually decreased. He couldn't allow himself to get careless. The final patrol they encountered was barely functional, their disarray almost more comical than threatening. A quick burst from Rojas's rifle ended them swiftly. We're almost there, Nulren said softly, adjusting his gear as they picked up the pace. The remaining stretch of forest was eerily quiet. It wasn't long before they could hear the quiet hum of a light gunship in the distance. Nulren glanced at his human companions, his thoughts reflecting on the mission. Their seamless coordination, their uncanny ability to blend into the environment, and the incredible precision of that long shot, all of it impressed him deeply. Their skill and efficiency were undeniable, and for a moment, Nulren felt a profound sense of relief and gratitude. He was glad to be on the same side as them. They reached the gunship and climbed aboard, the hum of the engines rising as they lifted off. The craft first flew to the Vermal base, where Nolran disembarked. He watched as the gunship ascended once more, carrying Daniels and Rojas back to what he assumed would be their own base. Nolran turned and headed toward the command center. The Vermal base was alive with activity, its soldiers and support staff now moving with purpose rather than tension. His mission had been the first move in a planet-wide counteroffensive, and the air buzzed with urgency. Teams were assembling. For rapid deployment, transports were being loaded, and communication officers relayed updates to the front lines. The command center was the heart of this controlled chaos. Large screens displayed shifting battle maps, while command staff worked methodically to monitor and assess the rapidly changing situation. Nolran approached the outer briefing room, where debriefings were typically held, away from the most sensitive discussions. As he entered, his superior was already waiting. Nolran straightened, ready to deliver his full report. A fleeting thought crossed his mind. If the Terran federal military continued to provide support like this offensive might actually see some measure of success. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.